Story 1, The Stranger in the Library. It happened to me. I was a freshman, excited and nervous about starting high school. The building was massive compared to my old middle school, with winding hallways, towering bookshelves in the library, and more rooms than I could count. Everything felt new and intimidating, but also exciting. One particular day, I stayed late in the school library to finish an assignment. The place was almost empty, with just a couple of students scattered across the tables, quietly working. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional rustling of papers were the only sounds. As the clock ticked closer to 6 p.m., the library grew quieter. One by one, the other students left, and eventually, it was just me and the librarian. I was sitting near the back, working through a particularly frustrating math problem, when I noticed someone else in the library, a man. He was sitting in the corner, partially obscured by a row of bookshelves. I hadn't seen him before. He wasn't wearing anything that resembled the staff uniforms, and he definitely wasn't a student. He looked older, maybe in his late 30s, and his clothes were rumpled, like he'd been wearing them for days. But what struck me the most was his stare. He wasn't reading or doing anything, just sitting there watching me. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my homework, but every time I glanced up, he was still there, his gaze fixed on me. My unease grew with every passing minute. Finally, the librarian announced that the library was closing. I hurriedly packed my bag and headed toward the exit, deliberately avoiding looking in the man's direction. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I turned around, and there he was, standing in the library doorway staring at me. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, his expression blank but unsettling. I quickened my pace, walking down the hall toward the main entrance. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I glanced back and my heart sank. He was following me. His steps were slow and deliberate, matching mine. Panic set in. The hallways were eerily empty, the echoes of my footsteps mingling with his. I bolted for the doors, my bag bouncing against my back. When I reached the entrance, I pushed the heavy doors open and ran into the parking lot. Thankfully, my mum's car was waiting for me. I jumped in, slammed the door and told her to drive. The next day, the school was buzzing with rumours. Apparently, someone had broken into the building the previous evening and was caught on security cameras wandering around. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They never found him. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run when I did. Section Story 2, The Shadow in the Locker Room, duration 4 minutes. It happened to me. I was in 7th grade, just starting to feel like I was getting the hang of middle school. I loved basketball and joined the school team. Practice after school was my favourite time of the day, until that one practice I'll never forget. It was a typical Thursday afternoon. Practice had ended, and everyone else had already left the gym. I was running late, as usual, trying to find my favourite water bottle, which I had misplaced during practice. The locker room was eerily quiet as I walked in, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. I opened my locker, grabbed my stuff, and was about to leave when I heard it. A loud bang, like a locker slamming shut. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, listening. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. Slowly I walked toward the row of lockers where I'd heard the noise. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. As I turned the corner, I saw it. At the far end of the row, a dark, shadowy figure stood motionless. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, its edges blurry and indistinct, like it wasn't fully solid. I couldn't see a face, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive. It was watching me. Panic surged through me. I backed away slowly, but the figure didn't move. Then, as I turned to run, I heard a low, guttural whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was calling to me. I sprinted out of the locker room, not stopping until I was outside in the cool evening air. My coach was locking up the gym and looked at me, confused. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but he just laughed it off, saying I must have been imagining things. The following week, I overheard some older students talking about the locker room. Apparently years ago, a student had died there under mysterious circumstances. Ever since, there had been rumours of strange occurrences, doors slamming on their own, whispers and shadowy figures appearing when no one else was around. I never stayed late in the locker room again. Section Story 3, The Whispering Desk, duration 4 minutes. It happened to me. It was my sophomore year, and I'd been assigned a seat at the very back of the classroom. The desk was old and worn, covered in carvings and scribbles from students over the years. At first, it seemed like any other desk, but soon I realized it wasn't. One day, as I was sitting there during a particularly boring lecture, I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was one of my classmates, but when I looked around, everyone was focused on the teacher. The whisper was soft, almost like a breeze brushing past my ear. I couldn't make out what it was saying. Over the next few weeks, the whispers grew more frequent. They always started when I was sitting at that desk and grew louder during quiet moments. One day, I lifted the desktop and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A series of strange symbols carved into the wood. In the centre of the carvings was a single phrase. "Help me." Chills ran down my spine. I showed the desk to my teacher, but she brushed it off as a prank by a previous student and told me to stop being dramatic. But I couldn't ignore the whispers. They followed me even when I wasn't in class. At home, I'd hear them late at night, faint and distant, as if they were coming from the walls. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering right next to my bed. My heart pounded as I turned on the light. No one was there, but my desk chair was turned, facing me, even though I'd left it pushed under my desk. I switched seats in class the next day, desperate to get away from the cursed desk. For a while, things seemed to get better, but the whispers, they didn't stop. They still follow me, even now. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Who knows? The next story might be about you. Next